Good morning, everyone. It's really a privilege and a pleasure to be here. I have been to Delhi now a few times and have really enjoyed myself every time. So when Bono asked if we could work together on another project, of course, I was yes, I would love to, and I would love to see more of India. But here I am back in Delhi again, enjoying myself yet another time. I do hope that I'll be able to learn more about the country by speaking with each of you and learning about the kinds of environmental health issues you find in your own backyards. So I think we started off by saying that we would co-learn and share our information over the next 3 days. And by going around the room, actually more people are in the room here who have, I think, extensive knowledge of environmental health. So I apologize in advance if what I'm going to share with you is a little basic, but even in your own areas of work, perhaps you'll learn something new about other environmental hazards that might be occurring in your country or in our country or globally around the world. So to begin with, I just want to talk about what is our environment. And so at work at NIEHS, we talk often about what is the environment. And some people would like to use the definition of environment to mean everything that's not genetic. Because genes and environment are things that come together and increase the risk of disease, and other institutes at our organization study the genes part, and we study the environment part. But there's more to it. So if you think about your environment, think about where you live, where you work, where you go to school, where you play, where you pray, where you spend time, indoors, outdoors, both locally, regionally, across your country, and across the world. All those things constitute our environment. And at our institute, because we are one of 27 institutes at the National Institutes of Health, we're specifically focused on the chemical, physical, biological exposures that we have and how they might impact our health. And so here, these pictures just represent a number of different environmental issues, mostly from the chemical world. If you think about, we have people who've already said that they work on water pollution, a lot of air pollution work, things like industrial emissions and combustion byproducts from coal-fired power plants, the recycling of electronic waste and the metal exposures that may come from that. Extreme weather is also obviously part of our environment, and as we have already discussed in the introductions, many of you are involved in the disaster responses that come with the new extreme weather challenges that we're really facing all over the world. We talk about nutrition, so you can have environmental chemicals as part of your nutritional base, pesticides used in agriculture, food contaminants that either occur naturally or because of man-made situations, but also nutrition as a mitigating factor. So if you have healthy nutrition, you might be less susceptible to some of the chemical exposures that you face. If you have poor nutrition, those chemical exposures may be exacerbated and may be doing more biological damage. There's many classes of compounds, synthetic chemicals that we'll hear about over the next 3 days. And we also can talk about the medicines that you take, the pharmacy environments, because those chemicals may interact with the chemicals that are present in our global environment. So there's many, many things to study in our environment, and there are many causes of concern, but there's also many ways to control these exposures, and I think that's what we hope that work at using communities, being intimately involved in sharing the knowledge that you have in your communities about the exposures and the impacts that you face, really will take the research to another level. And that level is out of the scientific books into the real society, making a big difference in how people can control their environment, can have power over the types of exposures that they may have, and also to think about what to do about that. So I like to use these 2 slides to sort of do a general overview about documenting environmental exposures. And each of these, is there a pointer? No? Okay. Do you guys have a pointer? Okay, anyway, it's fine. So exposures is a very broad concept, and there's lots of components to the concept of environmental exposures. So as I mentioned, there are many classes of compounds that are physical, chemical, biological, and also the social environment is also a part of this holistic view of the environment. And then there are many ways to document those. So you can ask questions, you can use focus groups, you can use qualitative or quantitative approaches to measuring your environment. You can track people's daily movements. You can use GPS coordinates to see, where they've lived over their lifetime. You can use monitoring, so water monitoring, air monitoring. You can also use measurements specifically in different components of our body. So blood, urine, saliva, those now there are chemical methods to measure a variety of exposures in our body in real time, basically. And many of our exposures, many of these chemicals stay in our bodies for a very long time. So we can use different analytic techniques to measure and estimate exposure. These chemicals have different targets. So all of the organ systems in our body, from our brain all the way through our skin, lungs, GI tract, they're all impacted by our inhalation, our touching, our ingesting, the way that the exposures get in our body. And environmental epidemiology and other toxicologic research has developed many new innovative technologies to be able to measure those in individuals and in large populations. I mentioned contact, so again, you breathe your exposures, you can touch them, you can eat them, you drink them through the water, and then you can just experience them across your life. And again, I mentioned the different places and the different sources. So as I said, there's many components in measuring our environment, and there's many technologies and methods that we can use to measure our exposures. And then on the pyramid here is to show you that there's a gradation from sort of the micro all the way to the macro. And exposures, both physical, social, and economic exposures, really impact all across these different levels. So we talk about the cellular effects, sort of at the DNA level, and being able to even measure the effect of a specific chemical on our DNA, all the way through how it is working in different biological pathways at the individual level, how exposures are found in our built environment, so in our homes, in our yards, in our backyards, in our parks, in the environment in which we live. And how all these things build on communities. So you can have small groups of people that are having similar practices or come together because of a shared family or shared interests or shared, or even a shared vulnerability. I think the entire field of environmental justice is really based on a shared vulnerability, meaning that sometimes people live in places where they don't have control over how clean their environment is, and they are unduly impacted because either laws or practices don't protect people from these exposures. And then again, to think about exposures at a regional or ecosystem level, there's research to be done at every single level of these pyramids, and I think that's what makes this field so exciting, that you can translate from the cellular all the way to the population, to the regional, to the global, and you can share information back and forth. And of course, the most important thing is to not only share this work among scientists, but to share that with the most affected people. And the general population, the general public, have a lot to learn from scientists and from people who conduct research with communities and in populations, and helps them increase their overall environmental health literacy. And we'll talk a little bit more about that too. So exposures occur across our lifespan. Exposures occur before you're born, right? Your mother and your father are exposed to a variety of chemicals, and those exposures impact the growing fetus, they impact the young child, they impact you as you're going through different periods of growth and development. So the pubertal period, where there are lots of changes in our bodies, are a very sensitive time for breast development, for sexual development, for growth attainment, and chemicals can affect the onset of those outcomes as well. During your reproductive life, your ability to reproduce, the diseases that might be, maternal diseases and even maternal mortality may have a sequelae that's related to past environmental exposures or environmental exposures that might occur during that critical window. Middle life and later life, these are all important areas. And I think one really important concept in environmental health that has become quite true over the years is that there's an enormous amount of literature that says that what you're exposed to while you're a growing fetus really tracks how, or really impacts how your different disease states and your disease risks may come to be over your lifetime. So if you can protect people and young children, growing babies during the pregnancy window, you can set people up for a much healthier lifespan than only worrying about exposures later in life. And I think that's probably in the last 20 years, that's probably the most important concept that we've come to appreciate, and we have learned a lot about the mechanisms of how that occurs. So I don't have to tell you all about the details of these exposure scenarios across India, but I do want to say that they're quite similar to exposures that we see all across the world. We've been doing a lot more work in the last couple of years at NIEHS supporting work in the lower middle income countries, and we see the rapid urbanization and changing from a pristine rural environment to something more where industry and growth and car culture and different cooking practices have led to high levels of exposure. In the United States, you know, we live in a very strong regulatory framework, and the U.S. culture and society were impacted at high levels of vehicular traffic and high levels of air pollution. And over the last 25 years or so, there have been quite a number of regulations that have helped to take certain things out of practice, you know, make cleaner burning fuels, protecting, reducing emissions and things like that. And so in our country, we've used a regulatory framework to help protect people from the environment and to protect ourselves, but that's not enough. People can make choices, people can pick products that are cleaner and healthier. We can also, through our own action and work, encourage different corporations to choose better chemicals and components. We work with the chemical companies, and of course there's resistance at all these levels. But one of the things that we have found is that when the community has a voice and they understand what's going on and they understand these exposures, they really take action, and it can have a big impact. So I borrowed this slide from WHO, and I think it does a really nice job of showing us all of the different health impacts of air pollution across the lifespan, across the organ systems. But just as an example, air pollution is not just a respiratory toxicant, right? It's a multi-system toxicant. It affects your brain, it affects your growth, it affects IQ development, it affects children in many environments. In the developing world, we see a higher level of lower respiratory infections and pneumonia. And air pollution has also been associated with neurodegenerative diseases, so in old age, Alzheimer's and things like that. Autism, early life exposures to high levels of air pollution are seemingly related to the risk of autism in young children. So again, controlling and mitigating any one of these exposures can have a huge effect across many disease areas and affect people at all stages of their lifetime. So environmental health problems are super complex, and they take a lot of different disciplines to understand and to make improvements. And so I'm just listing a few areas of science and education and engagement that I think are critical to any team, either an academic team or a policy team or a team in the field where you're working with communities trying to improve the lives of the people where they live. And so communities belong in this diagram. They really belong in the communication and engagement part, but engaging communities at the beginning of your idea development is really critical for how you set these teams up and how you make progress. And I know we're going to talk a lot about that over the next 2.5 days. So we recently published a collection of papers on environmental health literacy. And this is a concept comes from health literacy, meaning the more you know about your health situation, the more you can have increased literacy, your ability to act upon these things. And if you think about it in the environmental health concept, again, we want the general public, we want the people who are most affected by environmental pollutants to possess the knowledge necessary to protect themselves and to protect others in their community. And so if you think about issues related to a variety of pollutants from industry or chemicals that end up in consumer products, you can address so many parts of these issues using a number of different research strategies and research methodologies. And that the number of hypotheses in any given area is probably limitless, right? So why do you do the research? Well, to gain knowledge. And why do we want more knowledge? Because we don't know how, when, why all of these exposures that we experience cause disease. And what happens when we do the research? Well, us scientists, people in academics, we like to write papers, we like to put that information out on the web, on the shelf, and for a very long time, we were really gearing all that work to our fellow scientists, right? So that somebody could read somebody's paper, they could then take their idea and move it a little bit further, and then they could do some more research, and then do some more research, and then do some more research. Well, just doing that isn't enough. And at the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences over the last 15 to 20 years, we've really appreciated that that research has to come off the shelf, come off the internet, and be used by the people who are most affected. And this schema talks about individual action and the different ways and suggestions for how individuals can take action, but also the collective action of the community, of the population, of the society to protect people from the effects of exposures. So in this framework, we're here to talk about participatory action research. And goodness gracious, it has so many different names. And you think, oh goodness, this is, I'm doing this little part and it's not the same as that, but it's really all sort of a trajectory. There's some gold standards that I think Dr. Tandon and Dr. Parker will tell you about the, attainable gold standards of the methodology. But at NIEHS, we accept it all. If you're interested in working with a community or you're a community member and you want to work with a subject matter expert, we say we will give you the tools, we will give you the opportunity to get started there. And we hope over time that you all learn together and you move up that trajectory, but we are not going to fault anybody for not being at the gold standard level because it takes many years to decades for you to form those partnerships and for you to develop the ability to work together. So again, citizen science, that's a new concept in the United States. That's, putting this environmental health literacy in the hands of people, citizens, and having them run with it and do what they need to do to collect data, to make the best use of that data, and to turn that data into policy. Participatory action research and community-based participatory research, quite similar. There should be a very big focus on reporting back the results of your research to the community and to the members of your study. It's their data. They deserve to know. That's why they wanted to work with you to begin with. And for many, many years, that information just was summarized and put on a shelf somewhere, and the communities never ever knew what was found, and they had no ability to use that information to their best, to protect themselves and to improve their own public health. So I just wanted to put up some of these words that you'll hear over the next couple of days and let you know that you don't have to be afraid of them. They really all work together to a common good of sharing information and learning together. So I'll go through very quickly 4 short scenarios of research that we have currently funding under this program that we call the Partnerships for Environmental Public Health. We have a strong commitment to take the data to knowledge to action. We focus on prevention and intervention, and we've supported pioneering work in the U.S. and across the world, focusing on community engagement, CBPR, and bidirectional dialogue. And I think with the investigators that we've supported, we've innovated in methodology, theory, and application. So to begin with, there's a study in...
Dr. Collman, you have 2 more minutes.
2 more minutes. Okay, well, I'll only give you one example then. So this is community mapping and monitoring air pollution. This is where there was some monitoring being done in a community, and the community members felt like it wasn't sort of summarizing the air pollution situation. So they got hold of 40 more monitors. They decided where to place them. They worked with subject matter expertise, And now they created a flag system which notifies the community of the air quality based on the new monitors that they placed. I wanted to talk about pregnancy health because that's a very important vulnerable population. And I told you that if you give somebody a good start, they can avoid some of the effects. And here, farm workers in Florida are affected by pesticides, heat, and work conditions. And working with investigators at Emory University in Georgia, they were able to measure these exposures in their blood and urine and develop culturally appropriate educational methods to help improve their work conditions. Climate change is an important topic, and here community members in New York City are worried about how when there's climate-related disaster, the chemicals that are stored in their community are distributed in their community in ways that were not really predicted. So they've created a lot of research and methods there too. And the last one I'll do in 1 second, I promise, I'll go really fast. Arsenic, because I heard some people say that arsenic is a topic of importance in this country as well. We have supported a large study in Bangladesh, studying the health of people who are exposed to well water arsenic, and they've engaged the community in lots of different ways. They've provided clinical resources to the community. They've created interventions where school children are learning about arsenic effects and encouraging their parents to choose using healthier wells rather than the ones that they normally comfort. So with that, I just want to say that pollution prevention is a win of a battle. There's an amazing publication that came out last year in the Lancet, and if you haven't had a chance to see that, it really puts it in dollars and cents and makes you understand that we can mitigate the effects of exposure. And I think that's what this workshop is about, taking it to the next level and learning new ways that we can work together. Thank you very much for having me.